Okay, class, let's talk about kind of what I'm looking for in the narrative essay. So let's take a look at some past student examples and what I'm looking for and some things to watch. So most of this is going to be what not to do in your narrative essay. So the first example here, my last day in Mogadishu. If you take a look at the introduction here, it's really, really long. The introduction is almost an entire page long. Your introduction should not be one page long. It can be, maybe something more like this, or half, maybe close to a half a page, but, the highlight blue here is what you'd want. This one is a little bit too much. And then if you look at the conclusion of this essay, again, with the narrative essay, you want to make sure that your conclusion and your introduction are roughly the same size. Your conclusion probably is a little bit shorter than your introduction. But so if you look at the conclusion here, father sent this money. 2 days later, we had to go shopping and eat. Remember, the conclusion is not a continuation of the story. Your story should be wrapped up by the end of this paragraph up here. By the time you get to this conclusion, the conclusion should just be what you've learned, what you learned about yourself, what you learned about life, how it changed you, and the impact and stuff like that. So you shouldn't continue the story here. The story should end, right about here, and then in the conclusion here, you talk about, what you learned, the moral of the story, that type of stuff. So keep that in mind for that. So let's take a look at another one. Introduction here. I anticipate, you see the thesis statement right here. I anticipated my mom's challenge of finding tickets for the women's finals on the night of the competition and all the sites and events leading up to that weekend. Well, it's an attempt at a thesis statement. They underlined it to make sure it was clear, but again, the thesis statement should be a clear road sign of what exactly your paper is going to be about, and hinting at the conflict and hinting at the life-changing event that it was, and making reference to that. So here, this thesis statement is kind of all over the place. It's not very clear at all, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, let's take a look at another one. And again, be careful of format and layout. If you just look at this, look how much different than this was than say the one previous. This one looks like an essay. It has a nice it's indented from the sides here nicely. Make sure that you have good indentation. Make sure you indent the first line. And this looks, even though there's problems with this introduction, it looks like a good paper. This one, for example, is not formatted very well. If you see, the margins here are not set up right. The first line of this introduction is not tabbed over. See, if you tab it, then it looks a little bit better. And again, this person used a different font. Most of the time you should use Times New Roman. You can't go wrong with Times New Roman and 12 font. So of course it should always be 12 font up here as well. So keep that in mind. And again, this introduction is a little bit short. It's not very long. That one example was too long. This one's a little bit too short. And again, the thesis statement here, this is a story of how technology has affected me personally and what led me to being a computer technologist. This one doesn't really hint at any conflict at all, so this is not a very good thesis statement because there's no hint at conflict and the changes that it brought about. So I mean, obviously he's using the word that it affected me personally, so that is talking about change, but there's no hint at conflict in this one. So again, this introduction is too short as well. So let's take a look at another one. Again, if you look at this essay, again, it's a little bit too short. It should be a little bit longer. Not enough. Maybe this would be a good size. This would be a good size introduction just for size comparison. But this one right here is a little bit too short, so it's not enough. They start off good. The day was Thursday, February 7, 2008. My roommate Jessica and I decided to visit Walmart because we needed some groceries. This is a very good start. This is how you'd want to start your essay. I was excited because the next evening Kelly, a friend, and I were flying to Chicago. That's good, but you need to build it up like this, which the person did well. but you need to add a little bit more to get to your thesis statement as well. So you can't just jump from Kelly and I thought we were going to Chicago to blissfully unaware. You need a little bit more in that introduction as well. So take a look at the conclusion here. In conclusion, again, you wouldn't need the colon here. You would just need a comma. And this one, I guess the conclusion is about the same size as the introduction, which is good. This one, the conclusion is pretty good here because they're actually talking about, but I was lucky, and to this day I swear I'll never drive drunk again. So here they're telling the lesson they learned. So the conclusion here in this one is pretty good. So and then let's take a look at one more. Again, the format here is not very good. The introduction is not long enough. And if you look up here, it's Calibri and it's 14 font up here. So again, you don't want 14 font because otherwise I'll just assume that you're just trying to take up space and that you don't have enough to say, and I'll take off points for it. So you want it 12 font Times New Roman and all that. So again, this one starts off all right. It was the year 2005 and I was living in the most perverse country in the world trying to implement a jurisdiction amongst the local people. So it's good. It's setting off a good beginning, where it is, what year it is and stuff like that, but it's not enough. This introduction is too short. And look at the space in between here. That's too much, because if you go down a little bit, then the spacing in between the paragraphs is what it should be. But for some reason, it's again, this is something I would take off points for because it just doesn't look good, and you don't want that when you write essays for later on. All right, let's take a look at one that's a little bit better. Here's a good size introduction. This is a decent size introduction. You could go a little bit longer, but I definitely wouldn't take off any points just purely on size here. So this is a good solid introduction. You never have to underline titles. I don't take off points for it, but don't underline titles because titles are important enough. They don't need to be underlined. They're already separated by itself. Also, a thesis statement here. I listened to their conversation, and that was the first time I had really opened my eyes to see my mother had a drinking problem, which would soon begin to affect my life. So you identify the conflict and identify how it's impacting your life. So good thesis statement. It ends the introduction, and that's really good. And again, if you look at the beginning here, drinking too much can lead to a big problem if you're not careful about it. That's a good way to lead into it. My mom has always been a big drinker. I have always known that, but I've never realized how big of a problem it has become over time. So again, they're leading, sentence by sentence, they're leading into the end of this. So again, this is a really good example of an introduction. So let's pause right here for a second. Okay, let's just take a look at the conclusion here. Again, a really good size conclusion. In reality, since the DW of my family has been torn apart, my father moved out. I'd been scared all my childhood. I had grown up to deal with these problems. And again, at the very end here, I had learned that I am scared to be alone because of all that has, ever been done lately. So again, the person talks about what they learned. So one more time, this is a really good introduction. It leads up, it provides some details, a little bit of background, a little bit of a quote, and then it ends with the thesis statement. So these are some examples of what you don't want to do, and then this one here is what you do want to do. So this is a good example. So all right, we'll stop here.